So I wanted to next talk about the literature behind all of the research that I want to conduct. So I'm going to start with past teaching practices. I know I mentioned it earlier in my first video, but wanted to go a little bit more in depth with that. So as I was doing my research, there was this really fascinating discussion in one of the articles by Tickner and Tickner talking about the Little Red Schoolhouse archetype, where our nation has this fantasy or this idealized version of educators in their mind where they envision a teacher in a single room schoolhouse. They are the sage on the stage. They have the sole responsibility for teaching and managing their students. And while that is a really great ideal to have, it's no longer manageable or realistic for our current climate and culture. It's not sustainable. So, because of increased pressure for student performance, more rigorous learning standards, higher teacher accountability, there has to be a change in teaching practices. We have to be able to develop our new skills and practices so much more rapidly than in the past because the world around us is changing so quickly, and it's much more difficult to do this in isolation. So, PLCs have kind of come about because of that. In addition to all the expectations changing, the role of the teacher is also changing. Like I mentioned earlier, we're no longer the sage on the stage. We're more kind of the coach off to the side, encouraging our students and pushing them to think deeper and drive their own thinking. And so there's a major shift that's going on in pedagogical practices with teachers. They have to kind of shift their beliefs and practices so that we can better serve our students in this modern world without being overwhelmed. So PLCs help prevent kind of some of that burnout. Now, there are a lot of various definitions for PLCs, and in my research, every article kind of said something a little bit different, but at the heart of it, a PLC basically provides an opportunity for collective learning, shared personal practices, with teachers working together to improve educational outcomes. Now, there are four kind of main elements that are necessary for a PLC. And while each article kind of varied these definitions, there were four major areas. So, working together, collaborating instead of working in isolation, creating very concise and specific curriculum and skills for students, using frequent and team developed formative assessments that are centered around that curriculum, and then using data to drive the instruction. So if those four things are kind of taken care of within a PLC, they're considered true learning communities. So there are various stages of PLCs, starting with the implementation and then going all the way through it being independent and sustainable. So for the very first part, focusing on the implementation and the training, this is kind of just dipping your toe into the water, the very first part of creating a PLC. And the biggest thing that needs to happen is that there has to be a clear and specific purpose for the professional learning community. So as part of that, at the initiation stage, at this first part, a lot of the decisions are made by school leadership, whether that's the principal or the district. There's a huge priority shift because of a pedagogical change. Educators might not be willing to participate in it because it's brand new. There's a lack of culture, perhaps, or a lack of trust among colleagues. And that clear vision and through the direction of principals is really kind of what is starting to create the PLC. So once training is provided and once teachers start becoming a little bit more comfortable, we start moving towards the independence side of a PLC and the sustainable side of the PLC. But in order for that to happen, building leadership has to have proper training and teachers have to have proper training, whether that's professional development, whatever it's going to look like, it has to be intentional and it has to be specific so that the further health and sustainability of the PLC can occur.